Thank you for joining us today. This is Third Thursday Talks with Mikael Owunna. Before we get started, I just wanted, we at UCR ARTS would like to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air. The Cahuilla, Gabrielino, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. Sorry, just one moment, I lost my notes. So thank you all for joining us. We are so excited to have Mikael Owunna with us today. Mikael Owunna is a queer Nigerian, Swedish American multimedia artist and engineer based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's exploring the intersections of visual media with engineering, optics, Blackness, and African cosmologies. His work seeks to elucidate an emancipatory vision of possibility that pushes Black people beyond all boundaries, restrictions, and frontiers. Owunna's work has been exhibited across Asia, Europe, and North America, and has been collected by institutions such as Museum of Fine Arts Houston, Equal Justice Initiative, Duke University, and National Taiwan Museum. His work has also been featured in media ranging from the New York Times to CNN, NPR, Vice, and The Guardian. He's lectured at venues including Harvard Law School, World Press Photo, Netherlands, and TEDx. Owunna's first published monograph, Limitless Africans, was released in 2019 by Photo Evidence, and he was awarded as a finalist for the Photo Evidence Book Award with the World Press Photo. So welcome, Mikael. And thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Doug to just introduce the exhibition, Art in the Plague Year, which we're so happy to have your work featured in.
All right, my name's Douglas McCulloh. I'm a senior curator at the California Museum of Photography, UCR ARTS, part of the University of California. I met Mikael a couple of years ago in Portland, unless I'm mistaken about that.
Yeah, Portland.
And was immediately kind of stunned and amazed and impressed. He is in an exhibition that we did during this past plague year, which is online, as almost everything has been, and we are now, Art in the Plague Year. And that's curated by myself and Rita Souther and Nikolai Maslov, two other curators at the California Museum of Photography. It is, the idea of the exhibition is not we're trapped in the plague year, but art that kind of looks forward and gives hints of pathways out of this extraordinary situation we've been in with both the virus and the politics and the whole range of societal tumult. We ended up reviewing art by 664 artists from around the world for this exhibition, Art in the Plague Year. You can find it at artintheplagueyear.com, as well as off our site. And the idea really is summarized, and I'll hand it over to Mikael, but is summarized in a quote by the surrealist poet Paul Eluard. There is another world, but it is in this one. So the idea is, how do we move forward from this moment? Mikael.
I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much, Doug, for inviting me to speak here tonight. Lindsay, Rita, and Nikolai for this incredible exhibition. You know, it's really been such an honor and pleasure to be a part in. To be in the company of such amazing artists who I'm fans of so many people. And so I really encourage people to, when they have a chance, to check out the website artintheplagueyear.com and see just this incredible exhibition that's been put together, this virtual exhibition. So to start, I'm going to share a little PowerPoint to introduce a bit about my work and my process. You know, very open to this being very, very interactive. So if people have questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat. You know, Doug can feel free to cut me off too. Should be maybe about 15 minutes, and then we'll kind of segue into a longer conversation. But particularly because I'm going to be introducing a lot of the mythologies that are connected to each of the images in my work, want to really give this, make this a really open space for questions as people are learning, as I'm also learning about, these mythological concepts that really bind and connect Blackness to the origin of the universe. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and then we will start there. So the series I'm going to be presenting is from my body of work, Infinite Essence, which is also included in the Art and the Plague Year exhibition. So my little background I have is actually, just wanted to give you all a sense, because we're in virtual space, of what the work actually looks like in person. So each of the pieces are printed on aluminum metal plates, and we'll get more into it as the presentation proceeds, but metal is within African cosmological systems is a cosmic substance that connects us to the origins of the universe. And also within metal, there's these divine smithing traditions. And so I specifically use metal to connect the Black bodies captured within my images to these cosmic mythological African narratives. And so this is from a show that's currently on view in Austin, Texas, at Prizer Art Gallery there. And so it's going to be on view until May 8th. During the day, it's open by appointment, but during the evening from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m., there's a nightly illumination. And so you can see the work illuminated in this way each evening there, if you have a chance. So for my work, I base a lot of my research around the two ethnic groups in West Africa. And so I wanted to kind of situate us geographically before jumping in. And so in my research and in the myths that I reference in each of my images, one of the main sources for me are the Dogon in Mali. And so you can see here, so the Dogon live in Dogon country, which is right around the border, near the border with Burkina Faso, and have an incredible masking traditions as well. So this is from the Awa, the Society of Masks. And every about 60 years, the Dogon do have a festival known as the Sigi Festival, which celebrates the orbital period of Sirius B around Sirius A. And Sirius B, in case people don't know, is a white dwarf stellar body, which is actually only able to be detected with telescopes. But without telescopes and using African divination and cosmological systems, the Dogon were able to divine the orbital period of this celestial body and have this every 60-year festival that celebrates its orbital rotation and also the introduction of death into society. And so the Dogon have a really, really deeply documented cosmological system that connects Black bodies of the present to the stars. And so they are one of my main resources. And so some of the myths that I'm going to reference tonight are from the Dogon. And the other ethnic group that I reference in my work are the Igbo in Nigeria. And so a bit of background on me, my family is Nigerian and Swedish. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and my ethnic group in Nigeria is Igbo. And so this is also for me a personal journey and reference point in terms of learning about our own cosmological systems and reference points that situate us within the larger context of the universe. And so the two ethnic groups that I'm going to be referencing tonight and that form the basis of my research and the titles of my work and the captioning of my work are from the Igbo in Nigeria and the Dogon in Mali. The inspiration for this series, I think Doug was referencing, what is the future we're trying to imagine? And so in terms of like the actual origin of how I started the body of work, it began in 2015 with the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And I was deeply affected by, first of all, his murder and also the way in which his body was left in the street for hours. And then the media took pictures of his body and then shared it across the world without the consent of his family. And I kept seeing again and again these repeated images of Black death. George Floyd, Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, Antoine Rose Jr. And there's so many names that we can't even keep track of all of them. And I wanted to think about how could I, using my skills as my training as an engineer, so I studied engineering in college, and then with my training as a photographer, transfigure Black bodies from being these sites of death and state violence into these transcendent ethereal vessels. And so I'll get more into the process of actually creation of the images a bit later, but I wanted to also kind of share that each of the images are also anchored in these two African cosmological systems, the Dogon and the Igbo, to connect Black bodies of the present across space and time to our origin stories and our ways in which we situated ourselves in the universe. And so in terms of thinking about where we move forward, I also think about where we've been and where we come from. And so the title of this piece is The Nomo Semi, the Guardian of Space. And this references a Dogon myth of origin. And in the Dogon myth, the Nomo Semi was one of the first deities that was created. And he was sacrificed to, and as he's sacrificed by the creator God, his blood forms the planets and the stars. And so you can see here, the planets and the celestial bodies forming from his body and pouring forth, spooling forth from his back. He's then resurrected. And so within my work, I think a lot about these themes of resurrection, death not being final. And so the Nomo Semi is resurrected. And as he's resurrected, he turns with his arms, and his gesture demonstrates his role as the guardian of space. And so this is the Nomo Semi, the guardian of space. So I'm not sure if anybody has heard the myth of the flying African. You can put it in the chat if you have, or if something is something new for you. This is an African-American myth, and throughout the United States, and particularly along the coasts of Georgia and South Carolina, there are stories that persist to this day of enslaved Africans who were able to escape bondage by taking flight and returning to their African homelands. There are a lot of hypotheses as to the origin of this myth, but many people point to an 1803 slave rebellion known as Igbo Landing, where a group of Igbo people overthrew their slave captors aboard a ship. They grounded the ship ashore, and right when they are actually about to be recaptured, rather than be recaptured, they entered into a creek and they drowned themselves. And as they did, they chanted, "The water spirit brought us, the water spirit will take us home." And they flew home into the metaphorical primordial blackness of the African creator gods. So this is the flying African. In my research on the Dogon and Igbo, one of the pieces that I was really, really fascinated and captured by was the way in which Blackness is construed as this essence from which all life emerges, from which existence emerges, and also the way in which African divination was able to use this primordial blackness to divine orbital bodies of stars, their weight, their size, their composition, their colors. And so this image is dedicated to a Dogon diviner from modern day Mali named Inekozo. And Inekozo was also a priestess, and she would close her eyes and fuse the inner blackness of her imaginal worlds with the blackness of outer space and have these incredible visions of these celestial bodies. And in 1950, she shared with French anthropologists the weight, size, composition, and color of Sirius B, a star that's impossible to detect with the unaided human eye. And so that's the celestial body that I referenced earlier, that the Dogon do a festival around every approximately 60 years. And so Inekozo, again, without a telescope, is able to have these observations of these celestial bodies. And so wanted to kind of bring that in terms of the connection of Black bodies in the present to the celestial.
You know, a question occurs to me. The myths are so rich and layered and kind of wonderful. How do you take your research and your interest and your kind of diving into the depths of these myths and sort out how to transform it into an image, a single image? Because there are so many layers in the myth. So what is the process there? Does it like spring to you, or does it evolve, or how do you grope towards, like, how do I express the richness of that?
Yeah. So for different images, the process looks different. So for some of them, I produce the images first, and then in my research, I find the language to describe it, actually by looking at the myths and corresponding them to the images. In other cases, I actually begin by actually kind of having the scaffolding and of the myth that then informs the posing and the actual process of the creation of the images.
Wow. So some of them are essentially equivalent to like the knowledge of Sirius B. Like you have the image first and then you go, oh, wait, how do I even know that? But here's the myth that goes with it. That's kind of fantastic, right?
Yeah, it's like almost like a meditative divination in different format through the actual research process, providing language for work and for images. Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no problem. No, jump in whenever you want to jump in. I love it. I love it. And so this image was one of the first ones from the body series. And so when I began the work, I actually began the experimentation process for the image making in 2016. And then in 2017, I began doing just portraits, like the Inokozo portrait that I just shared, due to technical limitations with my camera at the time. And so in 2018, I began the body series in fall 2018. And so this is one of the first images from the body series, which was a collaboration with James Gilmer, who's currently a dancer with Alvin Ailey. And the title of this piece is Amma's Womb. It references in the Dogon cosmology, Amma as the creator deity, who is this polyvalent deity that encompasses everything within blackness, right? So everything is blackness, is this primordial blackness from which that's all genders, it's everything, it's infinite, and it's all one at the same time. And in Amma's womb, which represents this blackness, there are these prefigured signs which encode all of the potentiality of the universe, including the human fetus. And in this womb, all beings await their gestation and form.
Wow. Beautiful.
So this image references an Igbo idea of creation and also the conceptualization of the human being. And so the title is madu, and in Igbo, it's translated roughly as human being, but it's actually a contraction of two words, ma and ndu, which means the beauty of life. And so what is the beauty of life? And within our system and our cosmology, we believe that the beauty of life is by becoming a fully realized, spiritually enlightened individual, and enlightened one. So you can also kind of contract madu to mean the enlightened one, who is deeply connected to and draws on the primordial blackness of the Igbo creator god. So this is a little kind of jump behind the veil to kind of show and talk a bit about the process of actually creating the images. So we talked about actually the actual basis for the image, the caption, the title, etc. And so the way in which the images are produced is through using interaction with ultraviolet light. And so the model's body is here, and his body's already painted with fluorescent paints, so you can't really see them in the visible spectrum. So if you look closely, you can maybe see a speck here and a speck there. You can't really see them very much. And so I built my own flash that only transmits ultraviolet light. And so I turn the lights off, I press down on my shutter, and when I press down on my shutter, my camera flash is triggered. The ultraviolet light emits from the camera flash, interacts with the fluorescent paints on the body, fluoresces them for a fraction of a second, and then that fluorescence is captured on the camera sensor. And so it's an effect known as ultraviolet induced fluorescence, which is used in the actual production of the images.
And how did that idea occur to you?
Yeah, so I studied as an engineer in college, and what I like to say sometimes is that, I feel like my artistic practice also has connections to the scientific method. And so I start with a question, and then I'll pose visual hypotheses on how to solve or respond to it. And so here, I started with a very vague question. It was like, oh, how do I reimagine, time I was saying, how do I reimagine the Black body as a space of magic? So I tried light painting, which many people know, but if people aren't familiar, it's like when you see, those wedding portraits where people kind of write things with the sparklers and you kind of have like a long exposure, that's light painting. So I tried that with this series. I looked at the images and I went back to my question and I was like, this doesn't actually correlate with the hypothesis I had does not correlate with the question. So then I tried projectors. So I would project, nebulae and the oceans onto bodies.
So this is the experimentation side of scientific method here. Yeah.
This is what happened behind the scenes. This is like months of just trying things. So I tried the projectors, and then the projectors, they illuminated the bodies, but they also washed out the background completely. So it was not giving what I really wanted it to give. And so I went back to the drawing board again, and I was researching at the time Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian novelist who wrote Things Fall Apart. And I was reading one of his essays about the Igbo concept of one of the concepts of the soul. And in the Igbo cosmology, we call this the chi. And in one of his quotes, he said that, is the chi one ray of the infinite essence of the sun? I was like, okay. Are chis all being connected to the infinite essence of this cosmological body? So that kind of gave me an idea. Also formed the title of the body of work, comes from that Chinua Achebe quote. And then the real story. So in high school, I was a big fan of Final Fantasy, the video game series. And they had all this magic in it. And I really was really into it. It was it was a respite for me from kind of the environment that I was in. And so I went back to some of one particular clip from the game Final Fantasy XI, in case people are really interested, the opening sequence. And there was this creature kind of putting these sparkles together and creating this thing. And so I was thinking about Chinua Achebe's work and his words. I was looking at this clip, and then I was like, put the sparkles on the body. So I was like, okay, let me try that. So I was like, okay. And I was thinking, okay, glow in the dark paints. And then I was like, okay, fluorescent paints. And then I was researching about fluorescent paints and ultraviolet light and how you can create ultraviolet induced fluorescence and ultraviolet photography and how I could build a flash. And so it kind of just came from this iterative process that then brought me to actually producing the images. Yeah.
I love it. And also a mashup between, high literature and video games. So it's perfect. Yeah. Sweep in the whole orbit of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I just have a few more images I'll share, and then we'll segue to kind of like a wider conversation. This was another collaboration with a dancer, Derek Brockington, who dances with Dance Theater of Harlem. In this image, we are referencing another Dogon myth of creation. And so this one is Lebe and his articulations. And so within the Dogon system, the joints of the human being are seen as being the most important part of the body. And so you see really the emphasis on the joints in the image. And there's this entire story about Lebe being the first person who died within the Dogon system. And after his death, his body is actually consumed by a serpent, and then it's regurgitated. And as his body is regurgitated, all these colorful stones come out that then form the outline of his body. And so I was thinking about that in terms of the actual, the coloration, and then the location of the joints, which all have their own sacred number also associated with them. So I have 3 more images, and then here, another piece that I found really fascinating in my research was the ways in which these different African systems that I was looking at, the Igbo and the Dogon, also had an explicit understanding that the fundamental elements that form the human body are the same ones that form the furnaces of the stars that connect us to the origin of the universe. And here, in this image is titled Oku na Miri, which is fire and water. And within, there's a powerful Igbo axiom that states that madu bu oku na miri, a human being is a synthesis of fire and water. And if we think about it, fire and water are both these cosmic elements that were born at the origin of the universe. And the ancient Igbo were able to divine that the human body incarnated these same fundamental elements found in the stars. So this is one of the newer images from the Infinite Essence series. So the work began in 2016. This image was in 2019. And there's a new set of images that are also going to be released later this year. And this one represents the divine twins. So there's a lot of motifs of twins and twinning within the Dogon system in particular. And this image references the first two twins, the Nomo Die and the Nomo Titean, who together play a central role in the cosmic structure and unfolding of the universe. So the last image I'm going to share is actually a self-portrait that I took of myself. It is difficult, I would say, to paint yourself, which I learned, paint your own body, and to photograph yourself nude. Lots of things that come up when you photograph yourself nude, And so but then when I was looking at the images afterwards, it also gave me a sense of the experience for the models. And also what I noticed was that with each flash that was being triggered, because I had it on like a recursive, I think it was like every 30 seconds, a flash was going off. What was happening was that I would literally see my body glow and then disappear, glow and disappear. And I began really meditating on these themes of dimension travel. And also thinking again back to what Chinua Achebe was saying, it was almost like I was seeing a glimpse of my chi, right? A glimpse of my soul. And within that, also the connections to ancestors and ancestral traditions, right? And so the title of the piece that from the self-portrait is Dibia, which is the diviner and the healer within Igbo systems. And the Dibia is a mystic expert in knowledge and wisdom, and they undergo constant and rigorous training to expand their understandings of the universe. And here I was also thinking about, that process of kind of seeing my chi, like almost my chi illuminating, and that conversation with my ancestors. And then I learned, about how I descend from a lineage of Dibias in Abagana in Nigeria. And so I was using the self-portrait to also pay homage to their work and extend their cosmic legacy in my own way.
Is that an aspiration to be a diviner healer and to take on the mantle of your ancestors and move forward in this new way?
I mean, I think it takes a lot of training. And I think one of the hard parts is that there's also not the scaffolding, right, that we have access to here. So I think but
maybe your own version of it,
I think
artistic practice.
Yeah, I think the artistic practice definitely does draw on that desire and that longing to kind of continue that legacy through the artistic medium. Yeah. So yeah, for sure.
That seems a high aspiration. I like it a lot.
It's a high aspiration. So it's like, that's why we say aspiration. And we see what we do along the way. And so the last two pieces I was just going to share was just a glimpse again of the work, after we've kind of seen a lot of these images, the metal plates that they're printed on. And so these are at the larger size. These are 40 by 60 tube 40 by 60 inch plates that were just recently acquired by Duke University School of Engineering. And the last one, this is again, just showing them in installation view. This is 40 by 60 and 40 by 40. And this is from an exhibition at the Ford Foundation Gallery for an exhibition titled Utopian Imagination in the fall of 2019. And so where as artists, we were imagining a utopian future for our bodies. And so there was a really amazing array of artists, Inkishan Bari, Zach Ave, Lola Flash, Julianne Huxtable, who's also featured in this image. And so just thinking through what that means in each of our artistic practices. So thank you again so much. And I will stop my screen share at this moment.
I mean, I'll start with some questions and I'll toss them your direction and see. It's fantastic to me that you're creating these images that end up, 60 inches wide on the wall and using an invisible wavelength to do it. That's kind of wonderful. So you're dealing in this world of visibility and invisibility and making myths, which are powerful and yet invisible, visible. And so you're automatically in this sort of visibility, invisibility game, which obviously connects in a lot of ways to politics and literature and Black politics in particular. I don't know, speak to that. It seems really interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the pieces that I think a lot about when I see the images and I think about the transformation process is that within the visible spectrum, white supremacy and anti-Blackness have been created. And by kind of moving beyond what's visible to the human eye, by interacting with this wavelength of light that's not visible, able to actually illuminate Blackness as being Black bodies as being these cosmic vessels. The other piece that I found really interesting in the research that I've been doing, particularly on the Dogon and the Igbo, is that, thinking about that primordial Blackness from which life emerges, from which existence emerges, from which all the stellar bodies emerge. And that's a very different conception of Blackness than we have within a contemporary society, where it's this really flat socio-political construct, whereas within our African cosmological systems, Blackness is a divine cosmic principle of the universe. And so that's also been a grounding force, which I think ties into what is not necessarily visible.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic. That's pretty fantastic. Is Blackness as the source of everything and the source of power in a way, Huh. It's you haven't spoken directly about politics, but I can't, in this moment, it's hard not to deal with it. And somehow I've always, photography can deal with political issues, whatever, environmental, in a couple of basic different ways. You can either protest injustice in some fashion, or you can realize that representation and controlling representation is power, and do what you're doing, present it as transcendent and ethereal, or things that should be honored and saved and recognized. So you've gone to the, operating out of Blackness, you've gone to that light side. I don't know, do you want to talk about that? And how do you regard the work as political? I mean, or to what extent do you regard it as political?
Yeah, I mean, I think all work is political. I think all work is making a statement in one way or another. I think when people don't necessarily maybe assume that their work is political, I mean, that is also political, because then you're also assuming like a normalcy for your own experience, right? And so I think that one of the pieces that have been really, really grounding for me in terms of thinking about the work and thinking about my own life in terms of navigating everything has been actually that grounding force of the African cosmologies, right? And so as this world is clearly falling apart, does not function. And so it made me really think about what were the actual structures that sustained human civilization for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And the more and more that I've learned about our African spiritual science and African systems of knowledge and African myths, that's really, for me, has been such a grounding and healing force that has shown me an alternative possibility for what can be. I think that's one of the aspirations, I think, in politics, is to also think about what is the, what is that space that people are moving towards, what is the aspiration. So I think by actually looking at the past in terms of the African systems, that gives me a framework to think about what is possible. And so as I create these images that are referencing and are reviving these myths, I also feel like it's bringing in, as people can interact with these stories, it brings them into our contemporary moment, because we are all living myths every single day, and it's like, what is the myths that we're choosing to live?
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. It's been such a crazy period of time. Not probably that most periods aren't somewhat crazy, but it seems crazier than normal for sure. And part of it is clearly that so many people have lost their grounding, and you're really seeking your own grounding, but grounding for whole groups of people, and thinking about how do we ground ourselves in these histories and in these myths, and what do we choose to believe, and what meanings do they carry? That seems like a very fundamental kind of quest.
Yeah, because I think it also it situates ourselves not within the contemporary moment, but also where are we situated within the universe, as individuals, as human beings. I think one of the other pieces is that, one question that I've gotten is like, oh, did you learn this from your family? And I said, my family members do not actually know many of these Igbo myths of creation. And so I think that also says something, about, where we are. And so I hope that it could also be a in terms of introducing or reintroducing to people many of these stories.
It's interesting. I've been working on a project for quite some time with a totally, a group, the Pachanga, who are, indigenous in Southern California. And I've read a lot about their cosmologies, which they are in the middle of recovering because they were, negated in such terrible ways. But now they have interest and some resources and so on. And so they've been really regaining that. And the echoes to the stories you're telling are remarkable. From a place, their cosmology starts in complete darkness. There is nothing, nothing exists, nothing moves, and yet there is something within that, out of which come the first people, and then the first death for one of the first people, and so on. I mean, it's like these things are really, and they, I think, are regaining a sense, a powerful sense of who they are in recovering these exact mythologies. I mean, it's pretty amazing from a completely outside stance to watch. And it's a bunch of very, very smart people with a lot of resources figuring this out. It's kind of wonderful. But the echoes and chimes with what you're saying are remarkable, sort of.
Yeah, it's really powerful when you actually can situate yourself within your own origin stories, and also what that presents as so different, right? And so I think, for example, as we talked about before, even within that the system there, if the grounding force in which we saw and interpreted Blackness was as this polyvalent, infinite, divine source from which life and existence emerges, from which the first humans emerged, I think that is a very, very different way of moving through and interpreting the world that we live in. And so it definitely is really, really, really grounding. Yeah.
So how has it changed you personally, this quest? I mean, you were talking, I sort of pointed out that you have this aspiration to be the diviner or something. I mean, how has it changed you? What's your own personal journey so far in this?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I think when I began the work, so actually with my last series, Limitless Africans, which was a documentary series on LGBTQ African immigrants, one of the pieces of research that I came across that I found really interesting was that it was an article by Malidoma Somé. And in the article, he was talking about, because in that series I was responding to, oh, is it un-African to be LGBTQ? And in the article, Malidoma Somé was talking about how within African indigenous systems, people we would now identify as being queer or transgender were the gatekeepers to the spirit world. So queer people were the ones who managed the gates between dimensions. And it's a very, very different way. They were the healers in their communities, they were the spiritualists, they were the mystics. And now we're in the space where people are like, oh, it's not of our culture, da 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 da. But Malidoma Somé talks about the presence of these gatekeepers. And so I think for me, I was thinking about originally was like, okay, this spiritual aspiration for the work, right? And the spiritual aspiration for what kind of stepping into that role of understanding ourselves as gatekeepers can do. And so I think that's been kind of my journey, has been, I think even with like clicking on the shutter and then the flash is emerging and interacting with the bodies, it's like, and then you see this glowing being emerge and then disappear. It's like if you're watching a gate open and close. And so I think for me, that's been part of my journey, has been thinking about that concept of being a gatekeeper, but gatekeeper in terms of the sense of like trying to learn about being a spiritual gatekeeper and using the medium of photography and the medium of art to also open up gates for other people. And so I think that's kind of been the shift in terms of why I'm making the work that I do. And I think that's the biggest difference from the beginning. Because I think before it's kind of like, there's no grounding, right? It's kind of like, oh, I'm just making work because I want to make, I'm trying to find my identity. I'm trying to do this. And now it's like, oh no, it's like, oh, there's like a more of a spiritual mission to the work that comes in.
You simultaneously have your feet more solidly on the ground and you're floating away at the same time almost,
I like that, yes.
You sweep in all these different layers from so many different sources, and one of them, you talk about Achebe, and I remember reading Things Fall Apart quite some time ago, being just like blown away. I mean, that's an amazing book. But Walker Evans quite famously said that the finest photography is essentially literary, and so you seem. Yours also seems akin somehow to me to like music or something like that, kind of improvisational a bit, engaged with chance a bit, but also anchored in these myths and literary traditions. Can you speak to literary influences that are in your work? You've already mentioned some.
So I really, really love the reference to music that you made. One of the other elements is like, so music, rhythm, dance, but also within the systems, you can also see references to string theory, interdimensional travel, vibrational elements. One of the images that also comes to mind when you kind of talk about rhythm and music and also literary references is Sun Ra, and thinking about Ming Smith's photograph of Sun Ra, where Sun Ra is spinning. And as he's spinning, you see the beads on his costume also spinning. There's this vibratory element that comes in. You can literally really feel the cosmos vibrating within the space of the image. And so Sun Ra, one of his poems, because he also had a book of poetry that came out after his death, and one of his songs was titled Astro Black Mythology. I think that poem, and there's one of my friends, Dr. Marcus Red, wrote an amazing scholarly article about the poem. And in it, the Astro Black mythology, there's layers, right? So I think in everything, there's these layers. And so Sun Ra was also a jazz musician. So astro, you can think of the space, you can think of astrology, the connection to the cosmos of human bodies. Black, we could think of course of, blackness as this cosmic grounding force that from which all life emerges. Also, Sun Ra also references Egypt and Kemet. And Kemet is what the Egyptian word for Egypt was. Kemet means the black land. So again, this reference to blackness as being this emergent force from which life emerges. So astro, black, and then mythology. And I think this is also what's really changed my conception of my work and art in general, was understanding that within African indigenous systems, mythology was a system of knowledge that syncretized art, science, and religion to elevate human consciousness. And so it's a very, very different way of thinking about art, and also that these domains aren't separate, art, science, religion, and that the goal, though, is that they engage with mythology to elevate our collective consciousness. And so I think that's one of the literary references that I think about in the work, is that Sun Ra poem, and also just the vibration, the way in which vibration brings in all of these other elements that connect us to the origins of the universe. So I think there's a lot going on there. When you say music, there's a lot that happens within music that's really divine.
Yeah, I know. That's fantastic. I wrote an essay like quite some time ago for a couple of artists who are collaborating and really trying to, their work is essentially a synthesis. One comes from a scientific point of view entirely, I mean, a PhD, researcher, and the other is sort of a mystic artist and dealing in photography and trying to rejoin those threads that have been so separated in our society. And you single-handedly are trying to synthesize those things plus more. It seems kind of wonderful. I mean, it's art that sweeps in everything else, but also has a purpose in a way that is beyond just, limited scope. It's a very large set of aims, and that's wonderful.
I think that's been part of the learning too. When I kind of was first making the images, right? I think the first idea was about, quote unquote, reimagining the Black body, right? And one of the pieces there was a focus on form, right? Just thinking about, the form of the body, just illuminating the body, and that's a response. And then I think that engagement with mythology and kind of really learning about these systems totally changed the objective. It wasn't an objective of just redefining form. It became a syncretized practice that connects to the ways in which art was used historically too within African systems, and how that goal is just so different. It's not just an exploration of form, it's an exploration that can, as I said before, elevate human consciousness, elevate our collective consciousness of who we are as human beings.
Yeah, it's an entirely different undertaking in essence. And in some way, an individual image could be identical to your previous version, and yet the meaning is entirely different. It's anchored and has a completely different set of goals.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely.
So what would you, this is a crazy question, but what would you be doing if you weren't an artist? I mean, I look at you, I know you have an engineering background and you have this sort of scientific melding with art, but I regard you just really as an artist. I mean, through and through. I don't know if that's an insult or an observation. But if you,
I feel seen. I feel really seen. I love it.
But what would you be doing if you weren't an artist? Like, what would you?
Oh my gosh. So when I was in college, I studied biomedical engineering and history. And then I did a Fulbright in Taiwan where I was teaching English, but then I was also teaching photography to Taiwanese Aboriginal students and teaching them photography as a way for them to tell their own stories through the medium. And so that was the first time that I was thinking, maybe photography, could actually have some potential. And then I began working on my documentary series. But while I was working on my documentary series, I had a full-time job. So I was working in digital marketing, actually. And so I was working on Facebook marketing campaigns, YouTube influencer marketing campaigns, managing ad buys for political candidates in midterm elections. I was doing a whole bunch of different things. So I was very much in that space. And each month, because we had like unlimited PTO, they had all these crazy benefits. unlimited PTO. So I was like, I'm gonna use that PTO. So I went out every month and I would shoot I would shoot photography because that was my passion. And so I guess if I wasn't an artist, I'd probably be something in marketing, business side.
Yeah, so you'll be a powerhouse. You'll be an art photographer and artist who manages also to do incredible marketing on your own behalf.
Oh, right. Yes.
I don't know. And you also manage, I mean, you have some of your models that you identify are from extremely high-powered dance companies. And how do you manage to wrangle those people into what's obviously a wonderful project? But I mean, you're obviously pretty persuasive.
It's like, wait, so yeah, so the first dancer that I worked with, professional dancer, was James Gilmer, who's actually in the 2 images that are shown on the sides of me. James and I knew each other from when we were children, actually. So his sister did Girl Scouts with my sister. So we met when we were children, reconnected as adults, and then by that point, James was dancing with San Francisco Ballet and was about to actually start working at Alvin Ailey. And so that was the first collaboration, was also from a childhood connection. Then after that, I think I've started really working more and more with dancers. The mythological elements too. We talked about vibration, we talked about music, and also dance also captures that vibration that connects us to the origins of the universe. The vibrations that go down from the vibration of planetary bodies to the vibration of atoms, right? The vibration of subatomic particles. And so I started working more and more with dancers. And so James was the first one. And then Derek was in town for a performance with Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. I was at the evening reception and I just walked up. I was like, oh, I loved your movement. I'm a photographer. I showed him some images. I was like, if you're interested while you're here. And he was into it. I was like, okay, great. That's amazing. And since then, I've also reached out to and worked with some other dancers. So I've worked with some professional ballet dancers who are with Pittsburgh Ballet Theater, Alvin Ailey, Dance Theater of Harlem. And so I see that really as the beginning of a larger exploration of what dance can do. And also, I actually have in the fall a film coming out, which is connected to the Infinite Essence universe, but it's a 30-minute dance performance that retells an Igbo myth of creation.
Wow, you're spreading out. That's fantastic. Yeah, no, I can see why you would want to work with dancers, obviously. And I've seen Alvin Ailey, I don't know how many times. I mean, Alvin Ailey is amazing. It's everything from edgy, very, very contemporary, modern, challenging to kind of classics. But what seems to, one of the threads is this sort of ecstatic expression of power and joy and rhythm and all those things. I don't know, Alvin Ailey Dance Company is pretty amazing. And I see an affinity with your approach to things there. So.
Oh, yeah. They're amazing. Love it.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Love it.
There's a question that popped in. Would you consider teaching photography? You mentioned.
So I did teach in Taiwan. Yeah, I would think about it. I think I would approach it a very, very different way in terms of the way in which I would think about it. In terms of the structuring of the courses, etc. But that is something that I'd be open to. I think one of the structural challenges is that because I don't have an MFA, I can't teach at a university level. And so I think there's kind of barriers from given how kind of the institutions are structured to actually being able to engage in that way beyond just an adjunct level, of course. And so I have thought about it. But because I have an engineering degree, it's a bit more challenging to kind of pursue that as a much longer term career without getting an MFA. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Yeah, I know. But you're clearly overeducated already, so maybe another degree would be,
Just throw another one into the mix.
Yeah, right. You can never spend too much time doing that. That's kind of fantastic. So what is your, like you mentioned the film. I mean, every time we've talked, which has been admittedly a little bit scarce, but every time I learn something like, what are you doing? So what is your dream? What is your goal? Like where do you see yourself going now? So you have a film coming out now, now what? Like what's your dream?
So I really see myself becoming more of like a established multimedia artist, where photography is the base of my practice. And then I also integrate photography with other media, including like film, maybe three-dimensional sculpture, maybe, other media as well, to kind of tell an integrated story and create immersive experiences. And so as I kind of engage with myths and myth building, etc., creating these immersive experiences that people can be submerged in these stories. And so whatever tools I can use to get there, whatever institutions want to kind of pull these experiences together, is really what I want to do and build for my work. For example, if we're talking about the myth of Amma's womb, which is like right here, what does a whole space look like that has all of these different media integrated that can tell that story, and that viewers can then enter in and really have a potentially transformative experience with what that means.
I know I regard your photographs as amazingly immersive. They're a still image, but they're amazing. You sort of fall into them. They're literally like a universe or something. So I can see that sculptural quality, the kind of entire environment, it's sort of an extension of where you are already. So there's a complex multi-part question here. Have you worked with hip hop dancers? And will future series explore the paint pictures in movement? And also wondering about visual overlaps with the Sun Ra picture you mentioned with the motion.
So to date, I've not worked with hip hop dancers yet, but that's not to say that I am opposed to working with hip hop dancers. I really enjoy working with dancers. I primarily worked with contemporary and ballet dancers, but that's not to say that hip hop wouldn't come into the mix at some point. The other question was about putting them into motion. So that's what the film is actually working to do, is actually like through the film, the models are painted and they're also moving. So that's going to be the first infinite essence, quote unquote, in motion production. So that's in process. So stay tuned for that in the fall. If you're all interested, let me know. People are interested in screening the film, let me know. Happy to also have those conversations. And the last question was
any visual overlap with the Sun Ra photograph you mentioned, where Sun Ra is in motion with the beads?
So not directly, but I saw that image actually later while I was already producing the work, and I felt a resonance with the way in which I was kind of approaching and thinking about motion and the vibration, and also Sun Ra's work. So that actually came much later in the process. I've not done a direct reference to a particular image in my series.
Fabulous. Well, I think our time is up. I see Lindsay popping in.
Yeah, I think it is, sadly. Thank you so much, Mikael. I cannot wait to see the film. Very excited to hear about that. Thank you for your time and for sharing your work with us. It's been fantastic.
I know. I feel honored.
Me too.
Thanks so much. It's an honor for me, and particularly Doug. When we met in Portland, I was just so excited because Doug. I mean, also your work is just your photos are just amazing too.
Okay.
I love your your photography.
But I think you're going to take over the world, and probably should. So that's good. I'm hoping.
Oh my God!
I vote for you.
You vote for. Oh my goodness! Thank you.
All right.
I agree. Well, thank you so much to all of our attendees who joined us today. Third Thursday talks are made possible with the generous support from the Marjorie and Glenn Thomas Memorial Fund. So we're very grateful for that, and I hope everyone has a good evening. Thanks again, Mikael, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.